You get more out of life when you go out to a movie.
The moment our fellow geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerf Herder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
I wanted to tell, I'm talking back to the thing. You guys are going, is the Mediterranean salty? Yes, it's connected to the ocean.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not alone.
There was a couple other things where you got, I'm like, no. I can't remember what they were.
That's funny because I listen to a fair amount of podcasts and there are times where I yell at these people. I'm like, I can't listen to you anymore. I can't do it. So.
I just want to point out, well, I mean, I guess we could say let's start the show and then I'll point it out.
No.
All right.
Yeah.
Are we officially ushering in the Halloween season with this episode? We may be, even though we're
a little early, but I will tell you, I've seen some Halloween decorations.
Hey,
already, so.
Spirit Halloween's already operating.
Is it? Yeah.
Stores are open. We are covering the latest iteration of Candyman. And along with Candyman, we are covering a Mexican horror film, /fantasy / gritty urban drama. Tigers are not afraid.
Are they not afraid?
I don't believe they are. If I met a tiger, I doubt he'd be afraid of me in any way, shape, or form.
I think he's apex predator. I don't think he has any, except for man.
Candyman. Only 3 times I said it. I'm not going to go the other 2.
Enough
hey, all of us does it count? Do you have to say it consecutively or, mixed in your conversation? Does that count too?
I think you have to say it 5 times deliberately in a reflective surface. Okay. There does seem to be some intent involved. Nobody does it by accident.
Stupid intent.
No, well, the guy at the end of the original, when he was saying Helen, he did.
That was accidental because he didn't realize that she was going to come back.
He's so deserved that. He's so deserved. I couldn't wait for her to come back and take him out. I do like that. I will say right now, because we're already joking about the fact that I'm not thrilled about watching these movies.
But you did.
Not only did we reviewed the original Candyman.
Yep.
I am not familiar with the other ones. There's 3 sequels or 2 sequels.
There were 2 sequels, which are not. I mean, obviously Tony Todd is amazing because he's always amazing, but like the 2 sequels are not really worthy of the original.
All these reboots that have been happening, we're gonna ignore those and this.
But really, if you're a horror fan, you got to expect that. That's par for the course. If a horror movie is successful, a less artistically successful sequel is usually in the works, and then even more so, less than that after that sequel comes out. So you kind of expect that. With Halloween, Friday the 13th, anything really, Nightmare on Elm Street, you're going to have a million of these movies. So Candyman, even while it didn't go to the extremes that we see with Nightmare and Halloween, there were a couple sequels to Candyman, but I've only ever seen the first one myself.
Good. Yeah.
And this one, of course, and
this movie ignored all that.
Right. So it sort of acts like every Godzilla movie, which acts like nothing happened in between. Just the first movie happened.
Right. We're just going to talk about, I will tell you that I knew Cabrini Greens the minute it showed up on screen. I said, was it Cabrini Greens? I actually remembered that.
Cabrini Green. Yeah.
Cabrini Green.
And I take the brown line going north from the loop to come home, and I go past Cabrini Green every time I'm on the L. Yes. And there was actually a huge Candyman poster, like in the neighborhood. No, there really was. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this last week, but this really is. I mean, the first movie as well is a bit of a love letter to Chicago. There's a lot in this movie that I like. And I will start right with the opening credits.
Yes.
Because in the original movie, you get that aerial shot over the city line, which I think was done with like one of those like those football on a wire cameras. And what they did was they flipped it. Yes. So now you are seeing the skyline looking up, but it is flopped. So it is almost like these giant, it's hard to describe because it's the buildings going into like, into the fog or into the mist.
Yes.
And it just the soundtrack in this, and I don't even know if you can call it a soundtrack because it's just like this droning noise.
It's very spare.
It was very reminiscent of The Thing in to my ears of John Carpenter's The Thing.
These two things that open this movie, it opens with the credits, the studio logos flopped.
Yeah.
Now this is brilliant.
And you're like, all right, did they put the film in backwards? Like
because that was my thought. But then you think, okay, the mirror. You're
in the mirror.
Yeah,
you're in the mirror
looking out.
How brilliant would it be if this entire movie was presented?
Well, that's a minute you're waiting for. Is that the first scene you get on the ground? You're looking at like any placard or any street sign to see if it's reversed, and it's like I don't, would that have been intentional? That would have been weird, but it's not. So it's just the opening. It's the production studio logos that are flopped.
But I have to share this story really quickly, just because building off of that, thinking is this intentional or is this the projectionist making a mistake with these production things? I watched the movie Babel I rented the movie Babel, and you're aware of this, which has different stories over different countries. And in the English speaking story, it's Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett. I watched it on DVD, and for whatever reason, when I watched this film, the subtitles that were normally there, even in the theatrical presentation, were not there. It was just the foreign stories were just told in their foreign tongue. And this is when I had gotten a new DVD player. I was really unsure of the remote, and I thought to myself, well, of course, Babel, I'm not meant to know what they're saying. And I still got what was going on. And I think, and this is the most brilliant movie I've ever seen. It's forcing me to think about what's happening. And I actually know what's going on, even though I don't understand what they're saying. And then I found out, dummy, you just had to hit the subtitle button. And that's what you're meant to see. And like, I think I liked my experience better.
So should we do a really quick recap?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay.
By the way, spoilers.
Yes, many.
This
spoilers.
has got major. Yeah. This is a major spoilerific film. So if you want to see it, stop listening right now and come back after you've watched it.
Also, I do want to recommend, if you've not seen the original Candyman, I think you can watch this film without seeing it because they give you plenty of background. But I think
but I really like how they go back in.
The impact of this film is greatly enhanced if you see the first one.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
The film opens with actually a flashback scene to Cabrini Green in the 70s. And this young boy is been forced to go and do the laundry in a scary basement. And he goes downstairs in the basement and there's a hole in the wall.
Yeah, that's your first right there.
Yeah. And he kind of thinks he sees something moving behind the wall, but he doesn't look too closely. And a bee flies out, which is your first bad sign. If you're familiar with Candyman, he puts his laundry in and he goes to go back up the stairs and he turns around and there's a man standing there. Now, I should point out very quickly, before he went downstairs, there were two cops sitting outside of the building, holding up a sign, a wanted poster on a little sheet of paper saying, "Have you seen this man?" And of course, this man is who emerges from the wall. Now, this is not, at this time anyway, the Candyman of legend. Okay.
Now, this is what's throwing you, because your expectations are dashed at every point here until it all comes into focus at the end.
Yes. I will say, as a side note, I was waiting to hear his voice for the whole movie. Like, when will I hear his voice?
What is going on? I know he's in this movie. I know he's in it. Name's right on the top.
But the person that emerges from the hole is dressed like him.
Yeah.
It physically resembles him, but is not him. Yes. Obviously not him.
Yes.
So you're wondering what is going on.
Right.
And so he's offering a kid candy.
So it is a guy in a long yellow coat He has a hook for a hand, and he offers this kid candy. Now, there is a story going around that someone in the neighborhood is giving kids candy that has razor blades in it. So he tries to give the kid candy. The kid screams, and then the police come.
Are they really going to react like that? I mean,
there's some
that entire
okay,
building.
so there's some allegory in this film, pretty obvious allegory. So that's sort of this scene that you see at the beginning, and you will get some context for this scene later on. Anthony McCoy, if you've seen the original film, the baby who is stolen by Candyman in that film, is now grown up, has no memory of Cabrini Green, obviously, or anything that happened to him because he was a baby, but also because his mother has deliberately kept the knowledge of what happened from him, which I think is a really interesting plot thing.
Right, which is not revealed until the end.
I was going to say, film. Right, you don't need, right. And she looked like she was like 15 years younger than him.
She doesn't look like she aged at all.
But it's the woman. It's the woman. Because as soon as
Williams, yeah.
And I must be the target person for horror directors, because I did not see this coming. So when she opened the door and it was her, the same actress, I was like, oh, I almost audibly gasped.
It was kind of telegraphed that he was the baby.
So Anthony McCoy lives with his girlfriend Bree, and he's an artist, a kind of struggling artist. Doesn't seem like he's having a great time. During the course of kind of like a fun social evening with his girlfriend's brother and his partner, her brother Troy tells the story of Candyman. And it's sort of the story that you know from the first film, but it's not quite right.
No,
if you've seen the movie, you're
interesting. This is where I was a little confused, because I'm like,
it is to an outsider, because Helen is set up at the end of that first movie.
No, I love the fact that she's vilified in the story.
So he tells this story of Candyman and how actually, this woman named Helen, who was researching urban legends, she went crazy. She beheaded a Rottweiler. She stole a baby. She tried to sacrifice.
All true, by the way.
But she didn't do it.
No, I know. No. Well, not according to.
And of course, the residents of Cabrini Green at the time, which is confirmed in this film, they know the story. They know the real story, because at the end of the original Candyman, Helen is actually painted on the wall in the church, and she's angelic, right? She's a protector because she saved the baby. So in this version of the story, though, she's the villain. She's a crazy white lady who took this story, as something real, and she lost her mind, and she tried to kill a baby. She tried to sacrifice this baby to Candyman.
They don't use literal flashbacks from the first film, but there's lovely shadow puppets.
Yeah.
Yes. And these are gorgeous.
I don't think they're CG in any way, shape, or form. It is a practical shadow puppet.
And it looks like Virginia Madsen. It does.
Yeah. It is kind of uncanny how they kind of pull that. This backstory stuff, and you get more of that and at the end of the movie as well, but throughout you get those flashbacks told in this way, and I really like this direction.
As far as Anthony is concerned, this is the first time he's hearing this story, and something about the story really takes root in him. Now, of course, he idiotically says Candyman 5 times into his reflection in the window. And of course, at first you're like, nothing happened. And then you see, it's Sherman Fields, is this version of the Candyman in his yellow coat, his shadow kind of standing behind them. Now, this is one of the things I actually really like about this film. We can get more into this, is how Sherman doesn't really manifest. Like, he sort of appears in shadows and mirrors, but then stuff happens and he appears invisible. Anthony becomes obsessed with the story of Candyman, and he goes back to Cabrini Green to take photographs to get inspired for a new art piece. And he runs into this man named William Burke. And William Burke is the man who saw Sherman come out of the wall at the beginning of the story.
And that's something else we don't know immediately.
Because you assume the kid is killed. You hear the kid scream at the beginning, and then the police run in. You don't see what happens to him.
So, and he tells Anthony this story about what happened. how he had screamed, the police rush in, they swarmed. He says very powerful language that he uses, that they swarmed, that they killed Sherman, and that it turned out that Sherman wasn't the perpetrator.
Wasn't the guy because the razor blades in the candy.
So because he was wrongly killed, he haunts Cabrini Green. He haunts the area. He haunts, anybody who calls him. And I think this is what's interesting about this story, because Sherman Field's story is the story that Anthony initially hears. So that is the Candyman that he sees. That's his Candyman. And again, he's sort of really obsessed. But while he's there in Cabrini Green, he gets stung by a bee. This is also significant.
Yeah, this was telegraphed pretty loud. This was, and it gets grisly.
It does get very grisly.
This is probably the most grisly part of the movie. Like, there's some body horror elements.
Yes,
no, definitely. Right. This slow decay of this hand, and it's the hand of Candyman's hook, and it's just like, all right, here we go. This is
Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. Yes, what happens to his hand?
Yeah, he's a Brundlefly.
And it starts to spread. And one of the things that I like, again, like in terms of effects, is later in the movie when you finally see his shirt off and you see how it's spread up his arm, is that it looks like honeycomb. The marks, the way the marks are on his body, it looks like
just like Icky.
No, it's like it's stored,
get that checked, man.
In a way so that it looks.
Everybody is very polite around him, though. Nobody ever mentions what's happening to his hand.
Right. What's going on there, dude? Nothing.
Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
Yeah.
So, of course, Anthony makes this piece for this gallery where he has this exhibit, and it's called Say My Name.
Yeah.
And the mirror, as he says, invites you to speak his name, but also when you open the mirror, you see on the other side the blight that Helen saw in the original film, because of course the story of the man crawling through the window is a key part of the original story. And of course that was based on a real life event that happened in Chicago, because this low-income housing was built so shoddily that you could literally open the medicine
crawl into the other
crawl
apartment.
Into the next apartment.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, but by and large, these people are just pretentious. People.
So then, of course, the art critic doesn't think too much of his piece, and people are sort of generally contemptuous. And Anthony is feeling very sensitive about the fact that nobody cares about his work
until people get murdered. Then everybody loves it.
Well, and that was by the way, that was a great scene the next morning where it was on the news, and he was tickled pink that they mentioned his name.
Yeah,
and then here's Troy and Grady and his girlfriend like look at him in horror, like, dude, people died.
Because Brianna is the girlfriend. She's the one that found the bodies, so she's especially sensitive to this.
Yes.
And it's wonderful because there's obviously a murder that happens in the gallery that Christina was just describing, where his piece is, and the gallery, the owner or the promoter or whoever is there with his teenage girlfriend.
Yeah, his underage girlfriend.
Who loves Joy Division, by the way.
Yes.
And of course, she's the one, the Joy Division fan is the one that has to say Candyman 5 times into the mirror. But he brutally kills the two. And then they're discovered. Again, Anthony is watching this on the news the next day, and it's a tight close-up. And he repeats after they say the name of his exhibit, say my name, say my name. So I'm like, yeah, that is his name that they're saying, because he's going to become Candyman.
This scene, I don't want to say like brutal murders can be artistic, but this scene in the gallery is actually shot very beautifully. Like,
well, it's interesting because he's invisible.
Yeah.
Which is not the way that it played out in the first one. And I think I go back to that scene, that horrific scene where Helen is in the office with, I think, the police or
the psychiatrist. Yeah.
And he just like slams that thing through the guy's back into his chest. And I mean, yeah, it's grisly and it's horrific. But here, like, he's looking and he's seeing what's transpiring, but he can only see him in the mirror. He can't see him in reality. I thought that was a real interesting take.
And also in shadow. So like you can
Right,
see
okay.
his shadow moving across the wall, and you see the hook slide across the
And slash the
screen,
screen, yeah.
but you don't see a figure. So I
Right.
think it just adds like this other layer of menace, because of course it's this invisible threat,
Right.
right? And then this thing happens, and yeah, throughout the sequence, you know, you can't see Candyman
No.
except in shadow. You can only see his
Right.
silhouette.
I mean,
Against
he's
the wall.
literally watching his girlfriend get eviscerated, and he's like, "Is this real? Is this real? Is this really?" You know, her throat's cut. Yeah, it was pretty grisly.
And then he's trying to unhook himself from the
Yeah.
from the body.
But again, like I said, they're pretentious ass. And even like when Brianna takes him to dinner with these big wigs or whatever in the art community, and I'm like, oh, you people.
As an audience member, you don't feel bad for any of the people that die in this movie because they're all jerks. They're all, especially this guy was case in point. This gallery owner. It should be pointed out as well that none of these victims are of color. They're white people.
That's very interesting. They're all white people.
One of the things I like too is how the art critic, who had no interest in Anthony's work, suddenly is very interested once somebody gets murdered in front of it.
Now it's got a story to it. Now it's got a story to tell.
And by the way, the art critic, she lives in Marina City, which are known as the corn cobs, because that's what they look like. They're on the Chicago River. It's like one of the most iconic pieces of architecture in Chicago. Anthony goes to the art critic's her house, and she wants to interview him because now she's very interested in his work, because he's had this piece about Candyman, and 2 people have been brutally murdered and literally in front of his piece of work. And he gives her a little lecture, actually, about how white people use Black people's pain. And then he says something to her to the effect of, you know, you should go summon him right now.
Now, he spends the beginning of this movie goading people into saying Candyman 5 times. He tries it at the gallery as well. Like, go ahead, say it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no thanks, I'll pass.
Yep.
And then you don't see her say it, but you see her facing the mirror.
Right.
And you definitely have a sense that she must have said it, because you know, a few minutes later he's in the hallway. He thinks he sees something, and there he is, Sherman. He gets like a full shot of him, and he is a perfect reflection of Anthony. So if Anthony holds up his arm, Sherman holds up his arm.
There's a lot of these scenes that take place with these full mirrors. The elevator scene's another great one. Shooting this stuff had to have been a nightmare.
Yeah, because you're trying not to have the reflection of
right. But it happens a lot, and sometimes I get caught up in the machinations of actually how they pulled off these shots. And I know now you could probably just, you know, someone's wearing a green screen or something on, you just CG them out. But it's still it's a masterful effect. You know?
It's more complicated than it appears to be, probably, like at first glance.
Right.
So of course the art critic is killed. Anthony leaves, and she's killed by Candyman.
That was very CG, by the way.
And now, you know, things are getting like very extreme, and Anthony's starting to kind of lose it, and he's starting to paint these faces. He doesn't know what they are. It turns out that they are all Candymen. Candymen, multiple. Yeah. Going back to the original.
But it's funny because you see this evolution of his art. And what he was, and he was, you know, he was struggling a little bit, and he had to come up with a piece for this gallery. But the evolution of this art as he gets more and more invested in this Candyman, and you hear about people like this who have traumatic events in their life, or people who deal with like alien abductions, and how like bright, fun, and then all of a sudden everything they do is like this dark and dismal, and it's very, they're beautiful pieces. Beautiful. But the minute Brianna comes home and she's like, what is this? And he's trying to hide it from her. So I don't know if he's manifesting these and he doesn't even understand what it is that's coming out of him.
But also I think it's part of it that I don't know that he's comfortable with what he's experiencing. Yeah.
And up to this point, up to the murder of the writer, we're still only been introduced to Sherman Fields as Candyman in this movie. And then Anthony is driven to go back to Burke after the writer sequence. And then that's where we're given some more exposition. And thankfully, we're reintroduced to Daniel Robitaille, who we are all very familiar with, those of us that have seen the first film.
Yes.
That is the Tony Todd version.
Yes. And there's also this point in the film, you get this little bit of backstory about Brianna and her father, who apparently was also an artist.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't really follow through on that.
I agree. And I think that that's actually one of the flaws of the film for me. This is actually, I think, really interesting backstory that they didn't follow through on. I don't know if it was that they decided they want the film to be tight, because it is tight. It's only like an hour and 27 minutes long, I think.
Yeah.
Or if they did not have time to finish filming scenes, because I know I read that they filmed right up until March 2020 when things, started shut down for COVID. So they may have just made a decision.
They should have just gotten rid of that, because it sets up something that doesn't pay off at all.
But so there's
her brother calls her out for being sympathetic for these kind of artists that, obviously, she's somehow transferring her dad
ended up committing suicide.
And you do get that. And that was interesting too, because you get the flashback, but he's wearing a coat. He's wearing the yellow coat. And I can fly, and he jumps out the window. But it doesn't go anywhere. So you're like, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I didn't understand it.
I had a funny feeling that maybe they were working towards somehow her dad and her, that they were tied to the Candyman story too in some way.
Well, especially when you get the jacket tied in there, but you go through the 6 iterations that you meet toward the end of the movie, and he's not one of them.
Yeah, but maybe he killed himself before he could become Candyman.
That's interesting, but it doesn't.
That was where that was
right,
kind of like where my brain was going, was like, what if, because then it's sort of like all ties neatly together as a fable, as an urban legend, which is what Candyman is. That's the really important element of the story, is that he's an urban legend. It's a story that's told and is retold.
So it's interesting that you point out that since Anthony hears the Sherman Fields version, that is who he sees. So these Candymen don't necessarily, they're not successive. They exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And it depends on who your legend is, because the Sherman Fields version would have existed at the time that Helen was investigating this in the first film, but she doesn't hear his story. She hears Robitaille's story. So that's who she sees.
And this was confusing to me initially, because I'm like, oh, we're going like with multiple guys here. It's like a squad. As opposed to just Robitaille. The Hive. Ooh, look at you.
Well,
they set it up at the end that Helen is also one of them, because she appears to her scummy husband at the end of Candyman, but she's not one of the lineage here in this film. She's actually the hero of the first film, which she still is, and if you watch the first movie, but it set her up as a Candyman herself.
But she doesn't get called in the same way, so I think she's not part of that. And also because it is established in this film that these are men who are wronged,
Right. She was not killed.
Right. She was. Yeah. Right. These are men who are wronged, through racial injustice. Every single one of these stories, which not all of them are told in the film, but the remainder of them are told over the credits. And again, this beautiful shadow puppet style, and so that they represent the harms that have been done to Black men. And then I actually like the way that they've sort of reclaimed this story in a lot of ways, and made it now that he's more a figure of justice in a way,
which is what Burke pretty much confirms when Anthony goes to him. This is how we deal with it. And it kind of justifies where Helen was getting with her research. She says the same thing in the voiceover when you hear her recordings.
So unfortunately, this, I think the film is very beautifully shot. I think it's very atmospheric, but I think this is where things fall apart a little bit. It starts rushing very quickly toward the end.
I'm in complete agreement. This does not stick the landing at all.
And I think it's, it's not necessarily a problem of tone. It's more a problem of just being in a hurry, I think, to get to the finish. And I think a lot of times you think, oh, a movie could, he could have 10 minutes cut off. I think this could have used an extra 10 minutes. I think it would have really helped with the final impact of the story. So Anthony goes to see his mother, Anne Marie.
Oh, wait, before we get there, the stupid girls in the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't even talk about the
high school girls who are bullies, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So again, everybody who is killed by the Candyman here deserves it. Completely deserves it.
Yes. And as my husband pointed out, initially there's 5 girls standing in front of the mirror and one of them's an Asian American girl. She's smart enough to leave.
She's like, oh, no. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm done.
I was that girl, by the way. I'm like, oh, you are not saying that 5 times.
It's just like experimenting with a Ouija board. Nothing good can come out of this. What do you want to happen? To be murdered brutally? Because you're going to get there.
What is interesting, though, is that most of that violence is off screen.
Yeah.
You just kind of see the effects of it. You see the blood pouring, you see the feet, you see the girl crawling. You don't see any eviscerations. You don't actually see the physical attack.
And the girl that is bullied, that's hiding in the stall, nothing happens to her. It should be pointed out.
Yeah.
Right. Then Anthony goes to see his mom. At this point, Anthony, the spread has gone up his arm, up to his neck.
He rips his own fingernail off. Talk about like a Brundlefly moment. Yeah. Goes to the hospital. The nurse doesn't seem that concerned. Oh, it's a good thing you got here when you did. You got Candymanitis.
We're going to give you a candyectomy.
She tells him that he was born in that hospital.
That's the big takeaway from the hospital scene.
No, I was born. You're right. That's where he finds out when he goes to see his mom and he finds out.
He's like, no, I was born on the South Side. And she's like,
no.
You were born
she says, welcome back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where we learned that he was in fact the kid.
So he goes to see Anne Marie, and he even starts to say Candyman's name. She's like, no, do not say his name. Like, don't even speak it in this household. And then she tells him, he took you. We thought Helen did it, but he took you. Helen saved you. And then we all agreed to never say his name again. They decided to seal it off. They were like, this is done. We're not going to talk about this anymore. In a way, Burke has sort of kept this idea of Candyman alive. He's been in waiting because he said he knew the baby would return. Now this part makes me very sad because Anne Marie, she thought she lost Anthony when he was a baby and he grew into a man. And she's still going to lose him to Candyman.
Yeah.
Still this, it's like, this inevitable tragedy, like a Greek tragedy where, like Oedipus, he has to fulfill his fate. There's no way he can avoid it. And so he goes back to Cabrini Green, and Burke, who weirdly turns out to be a kind of villain.
Yeah.
Talking about circular plot devices, he's doing the laundry at the beginning of the movie, and he becomes the owner of a laundromat a little bit later, and he's kind of holding the torch.
Pick up on that.
He's holding the torch. He's holding the torch for Candyman or something.
Yeah,
So he's been waiting for the return of Candyman ever since that day back in Cabrini Green in 1977.
His exposure to Sherman Field somehow.
So that's kind of nebulous, his connection with Candyman. But he does have a nice monologue where he talks about, and he likens Candyman to a stain, on a piece of laundry. Cabrini Green was stained, and that stain, or you'll never get it out. It just comes back over and over and over again.
Stop talking about it. Or get some shout.
So, and then they kidnap Bree so that she can be a witness to this final transformation. And like I said, this is kind of where it falls apart because it's it's in a big hurry, and I feel there was just kind of more.
Anthony's almost catatonic. He hacks off his arm.
He's catatonic when he walks out of his mom's house. That's the thing. He just kind of gets up and walks away from her, and she's begging him to stay. And it's just I just would have liked a little more to pull this together at the end because I thought it was so gorgeously done.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, there's so much to like about this up front. the world building and what they've done, and the tying it back into the original. But yeah, the end falls apart, and especially at the scene when all the cops are rushing in, she's in handcuffs. She basically kills Burke, stabs him multiple times in the face
with his own pen, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, the laundry pen,
the laundromat pen,
right?
Yeah.
But when she's in the cop car, and the cop is trying to say, well, this could go one of two ways, and she just says, "Can I see myself in the mirror?" Yeah. You know what's going to happen. You know what she's going to do. Because let her say Candyman and then cut. I don't need to see the slaughter of 15 cops and then him.
That part didn't bother me so much. It's just that I felt that the denouement was rushed.
I agree with you, but I would have liked to I don't need to see that last bit of gore of all these cops getting mowed down. But
the satisfying thing about it is it's also a callback. First of all, she's trying to right an injustice, right? Because they shot Anthony.
Right.
So there's that. It is satisfying to see his killers get killed, just like Helen's jerk boyfriend. But also, it's callback to the first movie because Helen uses Candyman like a gun on the psychiatrist in the hospital, and then Bree does the same thing here.
She's using him like Batman.
Yeah,
it's like you're just setting up a bat signal at this point.
Yeah, and to use him, and then at the end, the very end, you get to see finally
Todd.
You hear his voice.
Robotide.
But you see Anthony transform slowly into all the Candymen before finally he emerges as Daniel Robitaille, as Tony Todd.
So Burke is successful. So Burke is the one that calls the police, knowing that as soon as they see Anthony, as soon as they see him with the hook in his hand and everything else, that he's going to get shot.
And they're just going to assume that he's the one who killed Burke.
Right.
And she was an accomplice.
And so then, and then he says, tell everyone, so now it's her job to keep the flame. It's her job to tell the story of Candyman, to tell the story of these men who've been wronged. And so I think it does, obviously, it's a horror franchise. There's going to be a sequel. They haven't announced one, but I'm sure, it sort of sets some fertile ground there, I think, to go forward. I just think it didn't dramatically come together at the end the way they'd intended. No.
But I do have to say it was cathartic for me.
Yeah.
To see, especially that one police officer that was telling Brianna that she was going to be framed unless she goes along with the story. That they save him until the end. Like that, he's like the climactic victim before you get the Tony Todd reveal. So that's cathartic to see.
It is, and that's what I mean. Like when I say seeing them all get killed, they just killed Anthony for nothing. They didn't.
Yeah, but Burke set him up to.
He's lying there prostrate, and he's shot anyway.
But you're right. Burke did set him up, but they didn't stop and look at what happened. They just shot him, and that's why it's satisfying at the end of the original when Helen kills her jerk boyfriend. It's the same kind of thing. Like you see this, this terrible thing happen, and you want there to be some kind of justice. And so yes, he's the final victim. He's the one who's killed by all the Candymen. And then you have this very beautiful, heartbreaking shadow puppet sequence where you see the stories of all the Candymen
play out
with Philip Glass's original music box theme from the first film playing over it. And I was just enraptured by the end of the credit sequence.
I agree. It's a nice wrapping, but the end didn't hold together for me.
See, I didn't mind that, and I admit it was rushed, and there were some questions I have. I like that mystery, especially in a horror movie.
Because
it makes you think. It makes you think.
Right.
What connection did the father have, and maybe this is going to be addressed in a sequel somewhere down the line. Who knows? Because it did do very well. It did do well its opening weekend.
And I'm glad. So for multiple reasons,
And Troy and Grady made it.
Yes.
Right?
I know, when Troy was like, black people don't need to be summoning shit.
Yeah, no, he's right. White people don't be either. Stop it. I'm telling you right now.
And she's like, Grady,
idiots.
no. So yeah, this was this was the fun fact I was going to mention. So both of our features this week were directed by women, which I love.
Nia DaCosta, right?
Yep, Nia DaCosta, who is going to go on to direct the Marvels.
Yes, we'll be seeing her. Yeah.
Tiana Paris, who plays Monica Rambeau. So Tiana Paris, who played Brianna in this film.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to see what she does with the Marvels, because like I said, I thought this was really gorgeous. I just thought throughout, like, she had a very strong sense of the atmosphere of this film.
Yes. Yeah, no, visually it's very, like I said, go back to that opening credits with the skyline. Very haunting.
And I think too, and we'll get into this more when we talk about Tigers Are Not Afraid, but like what's interesting to me is how they're both directed by women. They both are very atmospheric and sort of kind of in a very fundamental way, less is more. You talk about, like, you don't really see the violence, you see the effects of the violence. Kind of similar things happening in Tigers Are Not Afraid, where like there's not necessarily a lot of explicit scenes, but you are aware of the violence, as sort of a sort of a continual subtext to everything that's happening in the film. And they both use like these horror fantasy elements as a kind of allegory for real life violence. So I think this ended up being like a really nice pair in terms of the tones of the film, and what they're trying to say, over and above the horror elements.
After the success of Freddy vs. Jason, did you read this?
Yeah, this was my one note.
They pitched to Tony Todd a Candyman versus Leprechaun movie,
which is Warwick Davis, by the way.
And his quote, "I will never be involved in something like that."
Yeah, I thought it was a hard hell no. Yeah.
Good. And I also read that Jordan Peele is next developing a reimagining of The People Under the Stairs, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Critics seem to be split by this. Builds on canon while simultaneously dismantling it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it remains true to the canon. By the end, it kind of all fits in for me.
I think it expands. I liked what they did with it.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I'm not entrenched in this Candyman world, and it's like there can only be one.
Now, Vulture says the most disappointing film of the year so far.
Whoa.
From an industry that seeks to commodify blackness.
Wow, that's an interesting take.
Not one that I would necessarily agree with in this case for this movie. For the industry, I think that there's a point there, but it may be unfair to say about this film itself.
Especially given all the Black creative people involved in this
film. Exactly.
That was one of the big selling points of this film, is that the original Candyman, the story was based on a Clive Barker story, right? It was transported to Chicago by Bernard Rose, a white man, a British man, right? And a white character plays a very large role in the original film. And this story is like really about the Black experience of this story in a very, very, strong way, and they're Black creatives telling their own story. So I don't think I agree with that.
Now, I agree with your assessment of that. DaCosta, the first Black female director to have a #1 movie. So congratulations.
Wow.
Yes.
Nice.
All right. So what kind of buckets would we give to Candyman?
Yeah. So it left a very strong impression on me, sort of despite the flaws. I don't remember what I scored the original one, but I think I scored it really high. Again, I think this film could have reached like really stratospheric levels if it had just had like an extra 15-20 minutes to sink into it the way the first one does. Because the first one is about 2 hours long. It's not super fast paced. I'm gonna say I'm gonna get a 4. I still really liked it a lot, but I think only because it didn't have what I felt was a little extra time to develop some things. If they'd had like an extra half an hour, this could have been, I would have ranked this really high.
I tend not to go high. So I think my 3.5, which I'm giving to Candyman, is probably on a par with your 4, if you look at it that way. So because I enjoyed it and it haunted me afterwards. And I thought it's a worthy successor to the original. So
Agreed.
Because of that, I'm giving it a 3.5.
I agree. Artistically, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was nice to look at. But yeah, there was elements that just didn't work for me. I'm going to go a solid 3.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why I'm giving it a 4 was because my immediate instinct when I finished the film was to run back in the theater and watch it again.
Well, like I said, I have not stopped thinking about this, and I definitely have not stopped thinking about Tigers Are Not Afraid.
Yeah.
So it does leave you like in that world.
Yeah.
You know, whether regardless of the fact that the ending didn't work for me or that it just didn't stick to landing, like I said, there's still a lot to like about it.
Yeah,
and
is.
It's really kept me kind of, reflecting back on it. And so that's interesting because I'm not normally one who cares for these type of movies. So yeah, it was I don't remember what I gave the original Candyman, but I had to have given it higher.
Yeah, I didn't go back and because I didn't want that to interfere with how I thought about this one. But I am glad that I've never seen the sequels to the original Candyman because
I'm
now
glad I saw the original before seeing this.
Because I want to keep these two by themselves, I think, in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think you can probably watch this new one. Your experience is enriched if you've seen the original. You get more out of this.
Correct.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with some of these reveals that they drop on you at the end.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't have the impact.
The callbacks, sort of the visual callbacks that they do in the film, church, the flipped city, Brianna calling Candyman the same way Helen does in the first, all this kind of stuff. I think even just these little things that just give you that little, sort of insider's experience.
So there you go.
All right, so let's go to the concession stand and let's come back for Tigers Are Not Afraid.
Folks, it's really delicious, and we know you'll enjoy it too. At our refreshment stand, you'll find these pizza pies, freshly baked to your order. Make sure you get yours and enjoy it now.
So are we ready for Tigers Are Not Afraid?
Yes.
We are.
All right, we are back.
Doesn't mean that Jeff's not afraid.
Yeah, and I should point out that the Spanish title is actually Vuelven, which means they return. So slightly different, has a slightly different
because when I saw that title, I'm like, okay, that's not a literal translation, but I never looked up to see what the actual title meant. But they return. Okay.
Yeah, which they do in this
they
film.
They do.
They definitely return. This is directed by Issa Lopez, and she said that when she was writing this film, she had been through some terrible, terrible things in her life. Her father had actually just died. Her dog had died. And then she went through like this terrible breakup. And of course, she lives in Mexico. And she says, you're sort of surrounded by this background of violence. These narcos, the drug gangs, there's unspeakable amount of like death and disappearance.
It just seems like a terrifying existence.
This movie is absolutely horrific, and it's not for the fantasy.
Yes.
That is it is very disturbing.
So she said she wanted to write this story told from the perspective of children, and in many ways this reminds me of Pan's Labyrinth, where you see the sort of the horrors of the Spanish Civil War through the eyes of a child. And she wanted to tell this story, she said, with humility. She used those words, with humility, to sort of address what was going on around her, and how much, it saddens her to see this. The story opens with this statistic, that like over 150,000 people are dead or disappeared, and nobody knows what happens to their children. They just disappear.
It's not some evil totalitarian government. It's criminals, these cartels that are doing this.
And so the story is about Estrella, who is a little girl who's going to school and sort of having a semi-normal life. She lives with her mom, her single mom, and her mom disappears one day. And then because of this, she eventually encounters this little gang of boys who are led by Shine. They sort of reluctantly take her in as one of them. There's a very strong sort of Wendy and the Lost Boys element when she comes into their gang, I think.
She's forced out of her own apartment because she's run out of food to eat. Mm-hmm. So the boys are her last option to survive. And so she's kind of following them around in the streets, in the rubble. They're orphan kids, be it their parents, their grandparents, aunts, uncles. They're alone now in this world, and they have to survive on their own.
So one thing that happens at the beginning, there's sort of two sort of motivating events that happen at the beginning of this film. And the first one is that you see Shine standing in an alley, kind of following two men who drunkenly come out of a strip club. And he follows them. One of the guys stops in the alley to pee, and while his pants are down, Shine steals his phone and his gun. And then he holds the gun up, and you can tell that he wants to kill this guy. You don't know why. You find out why later, but he can't do it. He can't bring himself to do it. He's a little kid. You know, he's like maybe 10 years old, 11 years old. And he steals these two objects, and he gets away with it because the guy is so drunk he doesn't even realize what's happened. And the other sort of motivating event that happens is Estrella is at school, and there's a shooting outside the school while she's there, and her teacher, so that she won't feel afraid, gives her 3 broken pieces of chalk and says, "Here, there's 3 wishes."
While they're face down on the floor.
Right, while they're face down on the floor listening to the sound of gunshots outside the school. And the school ends up having to close temporarily because there's been a killing basically at their doorstep. And this, again, these are the motivating events of the film. So Estrella goes home, her mom isn't there. She waits several days. She's hungry. There's no food in the house. Her mom's not coming home. She doesn't know what's happened. And so she uses one of her wishes, wishing that her mom would come back.
That didn't go so well.
This is a monkey paw wish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, when Estrella goes home, I love the visual of the blood following her home.
Yeah.
The violence following her home. The victim that's shot outside the school, the blood runs into a line that follows her, and then the camera pulls back to the entire cityscape or townscape, and you see these lines of blood going into different places, like that are, it's touching various
points.
Like
a spider web, yeah.
Yeah. And these kids are connected in their need for revenge against this one particular guy in this cartel who Shine is trying to kill at the beginning that Christina has just told us about.
Right, Kako. And it turns out that he has incriminating evidence on a guy who is going to be, you see his posters all over town. He's running for some...
He's like a senator.
Elected position.
Yes. El Chino is his, I guess, the gang name.
Yeah, and the minute you see that those posters too, you're like, oh, this guy's going to come play back in here.
Yeah.
Sure enough. Yeah.
And you see him in the car at the beginning when Estrella comes out of the school, and the body's in the front, and he's in the passenger seat riding by. So yeah, all these kids are the orphans of the victims of this gang.
This Huascas? What is
the
it?
Huascas.
Huascas.
You hear on the news that this guy has connections to the cartel.
Yeah, no, he's not even hiding it. Right?
It's not even. It's not even a secret.
Yeah, right.
And the interesting thing, I think, is like when Estrella asks for her mother to come back, and she does, because it turns out her mother is dead. And she's a ghost. But at first, of course, you're scared because Estrella is scared, right? Her mother keeps, trying to talk to her, to reach out to her. But then you kind of start to get this sense that her mother's returned, but not necessarily in a malicious way. She's not necessarily there to harm Estrella. She's actually there to try to get revenge, right, on the person who killed her and the person who
and
killed.
she's trying to use her as a vehicle for that.
So this is again like where you see sort of this tie-in to Candyman, where like there's this real life violence happening, and like these fantastic elements and the horror elements are, you know, kind of an allegory for what's happening, you know, in real life outside. This is a very harrowing movie.
Oh, completely.
This is,
and we talked last week about Hard Boiled and hoping that the babies didn't get harmed. There's no infant babies in this one, but there's some young kids, and one of them doesn't make it out. And it's terrible. It's terrible.
Well, so this is the youngest character, Moro. So this little group of boys, so it's Shine is the leader, and then there's Tusi and Pop and Moro, who's like their baby, right? He's this little boy who doesn't talk. And you can tell how much the other three love him, and they sort of protect him. Like it's very much a family dynamic. There's like such a funny scene where Tusi's picking the peas out of his cup of soup, and Shine's like, eat them, they're your vegetables.
Your vegetables.
Yeah.
You know, and they have this like really, they're little tough boys, but they love each other so much, and they just look out for each other. And
because that's really the only family they have at this point.
But Moro, who is the little one, he always carries this little stuffed tiger, and he doesn't talk. He gets kidnapped at one point in the film, and you're like, he's gone, right? They've lost him. And then Estrella finds him in a cage with two other kids inside Caco's house, because she's gone in there with the gun to kill him.
Shine is requiring this for her to be part of the gang.
Yes.
Right? And because without telling her that he couldn't do it himself, by the way.
And she doesn't want to do it. She's scared. And so she uses another one of her wishes to say, I wish I didn't have to kill him. And it turns out she didn't have to.
She doesn't. He's already dead.
But she's so startled, she fires the gun. Yeah. And so the boys outside think she did. They think she's the killer. And of course, the rest of the gang also think she's the killer. Because the amazing thing about this film is how quickly this network of gang members finds out what's happened and like sort of who's responsible. Like they figure out that Shine has the phone, that he has the gun.
It doesn't seem like there's many people left in the city.
Yeah. Well, it's like people are slowly disappearing. Right.
And this phone keeps a charge longer than any phone that I have ever seen.
You can't just turn off the ringer. Right. That's all you have to do, and you would have been cool.
But so she finds Moro and these two other boys inside a cage, and she sets them free. And the boys think she's a hero, you know, heroine. Like she's killed Caco, she's freed Moro, you know, and unfortunately things just get worse for them, because now they're being hunted by the gang, you know, who want revenge.
Yeah, pieces of crap taking out little kids.
And also because they want this phone, you know, and you find out very far into the film what is so significant about this phone. The phone has evidence that Chino has committed a murder. Caco has filmed this murder, and it is the death of Estrella's mother caught on film. Is horrifying. But when these gang members come for the kids, Moro shoots one of the gang members with Caco's gun, and then this guy just shoots this tiny child and kills him. Like, he doesn't even hesitate. He's not even like, look, tiny kid holding a stuffed animal. No, he just shoots him. And that's when your heart really breaks.
Yes. And the kids by this point had come upon like an abandoned either orphanage or school, and they had set up a
hotel or something.
They had set up a home there. So the family dynamic is really kicked into high gear. Estrella, she tells them that she's going to find them a place that has a soccer field and has a zoo. And in a weird sort of way, that happens. They do play soccer on one of the floors, and the zoo are a bunch of goldfish that are in a puddle
it's
on
like
another
a
floor.
Pond in a puddle, basically. That's kind of neat.
So they really set up a family dynamic in this house.
And all these scenes are really delightful. Like this scene where Pop is like turning the light on so he can make the faces, and then like shuts the light off, and then he turns it back on, he makes another face, and then you hear Shine calling out, "What are you doing? There are people trying to sleep here." Like this like grumpy old man. They have like the funny little talent show thing. It's like all so cute, and you know that it's just not gonna work
and
out.
I love that whole little singing in the rain sequence where one of them has an umbrella and the roof is leaking and he's twirling under the leaking roof.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, the street art too. We didn't really talk about that, like this magical, the way he's storytelling their story, but you know, the tigers that he draws that become animated, really kind of a neat play on that.
Right, the tigers are like a totem that he sprays everywhere to protect them.
Yeah, because tigers are not afraid. We're all tigers.
Yeah, and then, you know, as the film goes on, we learn that Shine, when his family is taken, his house is also burned, and he has a burn that he's carrying on his face as well, which becomes significant to the end of the movie.
Yeah, that's a definitely a case of, well, you technically got what you wished for.
Yeah,
but that wasn't her intention. So Estrella, all throughout this, is getting these sort of supernatural messages from her mother, who's like, basically like, get Chino and bring him to where he brought us. So she's asking Estrella to bring her killer to his killing ground, where he has thrown literally dozens of bodies. This scene is utterly horrifying, where Estrella ends up in this pit with all these dead bodies. But they end up there because Chino, that they're going to give him Caco's phone, which he's still trying to get, because he wants the evidence of his crime eliminated. And he tells them, you know, he'll let them go if they give him the phone. So they swap out Caco's phone case, which is very distinctive, and they give him a different phone. And then he kind of figures out what happened, that they tried to double cross him. And Shine asks Estrella to use her last wish to get rid of the scar on his face. And as she makes the wish, Chino shoots Shine in the face and his scar disappears. But he also dies. It's just a harrowing movie. It's so unflinching. You know,
that's a good way of putting it, unflinching.
Where it really just acknowledges how all the people of this neighborhood are just sort of meaningless obstacles in the way of these gangs.
Chino is given at the end to the dead, and they exact their revenge on him.
And Shine plays a part in that. He lights the fire. It
ends on such a poetic note, with Estrella opening the doors into a new future, a new world, a vast green field. And it's the first really hint of natural beauty that you see.
I was going to say,
in the entire movie.
Dorothy going to Oz.
Yeah.
This is so bleak and dreary.
You know, but it's lightened, if only by the personality of the kids, who are so delightful, you know, just their interactions together. And, you know, there's, like you said, there's all these little fantastic elements, you know, throughout, and they're presented in such a matter-of-fact way, you know, where Estrella sees Moro's little stuffed tiger, who leads her.
Events. Yeah.
And then the mother kind of takes the form of like a little dragon fly kind of thing that leads her as well. I love that CGI tiger, by the way, the stuffed animal tiger.
But it's a very, again, like going back to Candyman, where I think these are really well paired, is I think they're both just really atmospheric. They're very much in their place. They're very much rooted in real world violence, and they use, you know, the fantastic elements to present that violence to you. And the real horror elements of this film are not the ghosts. The horror elements are the people.
All. Yeah.
I wouldn't even know if I would qualify it as a horror film. More so like a really gritty, realistic drama, and with some horror elements to it. And I saw it on Shudder, so they are touting it as a Shudder exclusive, although you can see it elsewhere.
I watched it on Prime, and it's on AMC Plus.
Okay. Yeah, so it came up when I searched for it. I was able to see it on Shudder.
You're right, though. I think it does say Shudder exclusive, but that may have been early on. Now it's this is 2017 movie.
2017 it was released. Yeah.
But you talk about the kids. I mean, the acting in this for these kids to carry this emotional weight. They are amazing. Especially the little boy who plays Shine.
Mm-hmm.
Estrella as well.
Juan Ramon Lopez.
Absolutely amazing. Really, and it is heart-wrenching to watch these kids, and this is the world they live in.
I have the Steelbook edition, and there's a really nice behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of the film. And it shows Issa Lopez is an incredibly sensitive director, like the way she works with these kids. You see her directing them, and like the way she's like really gets down and talks to them face to face, and sort of makes them feel the feelings, and then goes back and she hugs them, like she really it like makes them feel safe to express these emotions and feel the feelings.
I mean, they're really young kids.
Yeah. And they interviewed the little actor who played Morrow. And they said, what was the hardest thing? And he said, the hardest thing was the scene where I had to shoot the guy and I got shot. He's like 6 years old, this kid. Yeah. And then they showed her shooting the scene with him. And she's like down on the floor with him. She's like, okay, baby, this is what's going to happen, and like she's explained to him, and she's like, I want you to do this and I want you to do this. And she's like, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of fake blood on your hand, and I just want you to look at it. And it's, you got to think about, she's trying to shoot a scene with a 6-year-old kid getting shot.
Yeah. No, I mean, that emotion comes through on the screen. So again,
I feel like the comparisons to Pan's Labyrinth are strong.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, definitely. The minute you mentioned Del Toro, yeah, you can feel that through here.
A listener that hasn't heard of this movie yet may be turned off by what we're saying. Maybe I shouldn't be watching this if it's too dark. I don't think that at all. The subject matter, yes, is dark, but it's a thought-provoking, beautiful film that has many points of light. It is dark, yes, but I think it brings you through along with it. So I couldn't recommend this enough.
I agree. I'm giving it 4 1/4.
Yeah, this is a really, really good movie that, like Jeff said earlier, it sticks with you.
It does.
It just, your brain will just sort of return to it over and over. This is a really strong, well done film. I agree. I'm going to also say 4 1/4.
I would give this 3 3/4. Just bumping up under 4. I really liked it. It was a surprise and a delight.
Yep. So I'm going to say, 2 strong recommendations this week. Even if horror is not usually your wheelhouse.
Yeah, take it from me.
So what are we doing next week? Next week, we are doing a 5-bucket episode of the Muppet movie.
That's right. 5 buckets. Fight me.
Now, unfortunately, Christina will not be with us next week.
No, I'm sorry.
This may or may not be pre-recorded. I'm just going to drop that right now.
Hey, listen, we have to just keep new content coming, even if we had to record it 3 months ago.
After the Muppet movie, we're going to be doing Werewolves Within, which is streaming. And this is very, very exciting because we tried to do this movie episodes ago and none of us could find it anywhere. Yeah. But it is now available thanks to Shout Factory in a brand new, pristine version, Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Woo! Very excited.
So Muppet movie next week. The week following, we're doing a werewolf theme again.
We're heading into October, man.
And Brotherhood of the Wolf. So all you horror fans that listen for Candyman, come on back for your horror fix.
Yeah, you might hear me scream. All right, thanks for listening.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, everybody. If you liked the podcast you just heard, then please follow TMI on all of our social media outlets. First and foremost, email us at tmipodcast2018@gmail.com. That is tmipodcast2018@gmail.com.
And you can follow us on Twitter at @TMI_podcast 2018. Stop over, say hi, give us a compliment. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Make sure you follow us on Instagram as well, which is also TMI_podcast 2018.
And of course, we are on Facebook, facebook.com/TMI Podcast 2018. And it should be noted, we also have a community page, so join the forum.
And if you like to watch YouTube, you can see us at TMI Podcast 2018, all one word. Look for the popcorn bucket.
Popcorn bucket. Or you could just go to our website, which has every link there, TMIConfessionalspodcast.com. And we'll see you at the concession stand.
We'll save some popcorn for you.
She's like, oh, no, I'm out of here.
No, you
I'm done.
Candyman.
I'm done.
I was that girl, by the way. I'm like, oh, you are not saying that 5 times.